My name is Lise Doucette. I am by profession a BBC journalist. I am by nationality a Canadian. But today, here on the first morning of the Sully Forum, I am, like all of you, very concerned about the human costs of war. As Prime Minister Abadi has just told us, winning a war has no meaning unless you win the peace. Good morning, Rojbash, Marhaba, Sabah al-Khair. I'll try again. This is the first sign of life from you for the next hour and a half. You are not just attending the Sully Forum, you are participating in the Sully Forum. So I will try again. Ladies and gentlemen, Sabah al-Khair. Thank you very, very much. And I want another sign of life from all of you. As each of our speakers has taken care to mention, to emphasize, today is International Women's Day. But I'm looking out at an audience which has so many men. Could all of the women please stand up? Please stand up, all of the women. And please, all of you, say Happy International Women's Day. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted a sign of life from an audience before we discuss the human costs of war. As Barham Saleh took pains to mention, gone are the days when discussing the human cost of war is the last session on the last day. A war which does not put the protection of the people first, before, and during, and the day after the war is a war which will return. Iraq knows that. It is the main challenge now facing Iraq, as all of you here today know. So our session, The Human Costs of War, is not just about aid. It is not just about humanitarian issues. It is also about the politics and the security of war. We have a fantastic panel. We have a member of the Iraqi government which has promised to protect the people. We have leading members of international aid agencies who say they will help the Iraqi government to protect the people. And we have an Iraqi expert who will help to ensure that that happens. But first, let us focus on one of the most powerful examples in Iraq, not the only one, but one of the most powerful about the human cost of war, and that is the plight of the Yazidi people. None of you need to be told what happened in August of 2014 when Daesh went into the villages of Sinjar and other places where tens of thousands of Yazidi lives were forever and brutally changed. The men were killed or kidnapped. The women were also kidnapped. And the story of what happened next is not just a story of the Yazidi people, but a story of war crimes and crimes against humanity. But in this story of human suffering, there is also one story which has come to be identified with the name of a brave Yazidi woman who has come to be known as the girl who beat ISIS. It is her story and the name of her book. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Farida Abbas.
روجا وهموا بخير از بخير هاتنا وهمواتكم از ایرو الورم كاكاچا كايزدي الشخل كشنغالش گنده كوچو و اسيا كشوان هزارت كاش وجن وزارو هكاش دستي هكا كاتينا دستي داعش ده وهكا تعرضي ليدانه واهانه واغتصابه وهمو انواع التعذيب بوي اس روجا جني بيروزت كم الهمو جنا وأس هيفيتكم أس ككتشكا كوساب سيري هاتي وساد الميديتي كتجارس نبينم يكجن ود المية وتعديبية ببينه. سيداتي وسادتي، طابت أوقاتكم جميعا. بداية أشكركم على إعطائي هذا الفرصة والشرف لحدود منتدى السليمانية السنوي الخامس. أنا فريدة عباس، ناجية من الإبادة اليزيدية. كنت أعيش في قرية كوجو في منطقة شنغال عندما قامت الدولة الإسلامية بمهاجمتنا في 3 من آب عام 2014 وفرضوا علينا الحصار ل12 يوم. طلبوا من أهل القرية بالتجمع في المدرسة. فرقوا هناك الرجال من النساء والأطفال وسلبونا من المجوهرات والمال وكل ما نملك. طلبوا منا بعدها بترك ديننا واعتناق الإسلام، ولكننا رفضنا، فأخذوا الرجال إلى أطراف القرية وقاموا بقتلهم بوحشية. وكان من ضمن الرجال والدي و2 من إخواني. بتقديرنا قتل داعش أكثر من 700 شخص ذلك اليوم. ثم أخذونا نحن النساء والأطفال إلى معهد سولاخ. هناك أيضا قاموا بتفريقنا، حيث تم اقتياد البعض إلى موصل والبعض الآخر إلى تل أحفر وسوريا. تم نقلي مع 47 امرأة وفتاة أخرى إلى رقة. كانت هناك أسواق لبيع وشراء الأطفال وتزويج القصر النساء. كانوا يتعدون علينا ويقومون بإهانتنا وإجبارنا على الصلاة وعلى إهانة عقيدتنا. بعد أن وصلنا إلى رقة حجزونا في مقر رئيسي لداعش، وفي كل مرة عناصر داعش كانوا يختارون البنات لأخذهم واغتصابهم. كنت أرفض ذلك، ولكن تم نقلي مع مجموعة أخرى من الفتيات بالقوة إلى منزل مهجور في المدينة. كنت أعيش الرعب كل يوم بل كل دقيقة. في ذلك المنزل المهجور تعرضت أنا وفتاة أخرى إلى الضرب، ثم جلبوا فتاتين آخرتين وطلبوا منا الاستحمام لكي يتعدوا علينا بعدها. في أحد المرات طلبوا مني أن أذهب معهم إلى الحرب لكي أفجر نفسي بعد أن يتم تنسيقي بالمواد المتفجرة، لكنني رفضت ذلك، وعلى أثرها تعرضت إلى الضرب مرة أخرى. كان ينوي أن يتعدي علي جسديا. بينما كنت أركض وجدت قطعة من الزجاج وقمت بقطع شراييني. فقدت الوعي وكان هناك نزيف، وعندما فتحت عيوني وجدت نفسي راقدة في منزل شخص وهو الدكتور برفقة صديقتي، وكان الدكتور يعالجني لكي يتعدوا علي مجددا. بعد ذلك تم اقتيادي برفقة صديقتي إلى منزل شخص سوري في مدينة طبقة. بقينا في ذلك المنزل لمدة 10 أيام، وطوال هذه الفترة كنت أتعرض إلى الضرب والعنف. حاولت لمرتين الفرار لكنني لم أنجح، وتم إلقاء القبض علي، ومن ثم نقلنا إلى قرية شحيطات، حيث كان يتواجد نحو 30 مسلح من الداعش، وتم منحي كحصة وكهدية للأمير. رفضت أن أكون مع أميرهم فقام بضربي وإهانتي، حتى جلبوا سلاسل حديدية وقاموا بربط يدي، و5 من مسلحين الداعش مع الأمير اعتدوا علي، وعلى أثرهم حدث نزيف من رأسي وعيني، وكنت عاجزة عن المشي لمدة 2 شهر. بعد أن غادر الأمير المكان طلب من جنوده بمعاقبتي بأقسى وأشد العقوبات. لم يكن يعطوني الطعام، كانوا فقط يعطونني الماء الحار لمرة واحدة في اليوم. لم أكن أتحمل، فحاولت الانتحار 4 مرات لكنني لم أفلح. في أحد الأيام المعاناة لم تقتصر على هذا، بل اقتياد إلى أحد المعامل بمدينة دير الزور، حيث كان هناك العديد من الفتيات اليزيديات. الإرهابيين كانوا يرتادون إلى مكان ليلا ويأخذون الفتيات ويعيدونهم في وقت النهار. بعد أشهر من المأساة والأسر جلب أحدهم صورة لوالدي وشقيقي، قال: هل تعرفين هؤلاء الأشخاص؟ فقلت: لا أعرفهم. فقام بدربي وقالوا: إنك تعرفينهم لكنك تتجاهلين. في نهاية الأمر قال أحدهم: عندما يأتي الأمير سوف نذبحك لأنك لا تعتنقين الإسلام وتفصلين الكفر عن ذلك. قصتي هي واحدة من آلاف القصص والتراجيديات التي تعرض لها المئات من النساء والفتيات اليزيديات. بعد معاناة كثيرة استطعت الهروب وأتيت إلى مخيمات النازحين في كردستان، وكبقية الناجيات كنت أمر بظروف معيشية ونفسية وصحية صعبة. أنا الآن أعيش في ألمانيا، حيث تم إجلاؤنا أنا و1100 امرأة وطفل من الضحايا. أنا هنا اليوم لا لأتحدث عن قصتي فقط، وإنما لأتحدث عن مأساة المرأة في منطقتنا، المرأة التي هي الطرف الأضعف في المجتمع، التي عادما تتعرض إلى أشد المأساة. نعم، ونحن نستقبل اليوم المرأة العالمية. المرأة في الشرق الأوسط عامة وخاصة في العراق وسوريا هي الضحية الأكبر. إلى الآن داعش يحتجز أكثر من 3200 امرأة وطفل يزيدي لا نعلم عنهم شيء، سوى أن النساء يتم استخدامهن للاستبعاد الجنسي، والأطفال يتم تدريبهم ويستخدمونهم حاليا كقوة قتالية ودروع بشرية في المعارك. داعش لا تزال تستخدم هؤلاء النساء كعبيد الجنس، ويتم توزيعهم على المقرات والبيوت ويستخدمونهم كأدوات. ما تعرض لها اليزيديين كان إبادة جماعية، حيث تم قتل والسبي أكثر من 10,000 إنسان بريء، وهو الرقم كبير في مجتمع صغير من نصف مليون إنسان. ليس فقط نحن الضحية، الإرهاب هو شر أعمى قضى على كل ما أسمه الحياة في منطقتنا. هناك اليوم ملايين من الأيتام ومئات الآلاف من الأرامل والملايين من النازحين. نحن نتحدث عن هذه المأساة الأكثر من عامين، لست أنا لوحدي، وإنما نادية ولمياء وإخلاص وغيرهن العديد من الناجئات، لكن العالم لا يتحرك، فإن الإنسانية تموت. أتيت هنا قبل أقل من أسبوع والحال لم يتغير، الحال يتجه نحو السوء، وهناك صراعات كثيرة. كان هناك صراع مسلح، ما هو مؤسف، المجاميع المقاتلة تقاتل بعضها. كان يفترض بالجميع قتال الداعش والمجاميع المتطرفة وإعادة الكرامة لنا كضحايا وكشعب على الإبادة. يجب أن يكون هناك حل جذري للصراع، ويجب أن تكون هناك حماية للأقليات حتى لا تضطر لترك أراضيها إلى الأبد. إن لم نتحرك ستتفرغ منطقتنا من الأقليات الدينية وكل ما لا يتفق مع الفكر المتطرف. يجب على الحكومة العراقية أن تعمل أكثر من أجل حل الصراع الذي يحدث في سنجار وعودة أهاليها إلى مناطقهم. 2.5 سنين قد مضوا ولا زلنا ننتظر محاسبة المقصرين والمتسببين بارتكاب إبادة بحقنا. المأساة الأكبر لم يتم إلى اليوم محاسبة أحد على إبادتنا. ختاما أشكركم على وقتكم وأتمنى لكم التوفيق والنجاح في هذا المنتدى. أتمنى أن يكون هناك كثير من الحوار والقليل من الحروب في منطقتنا، فنحن اليوم بأشد الحاجة إلى الحوار وعلى عمل حقيقي على الأرض لإنهاء المأساة. هذه قصتي هي واحدة من آلاف القصص للفتيات اليزيديات. أهديكم نسخة من كتابي الذي ستر ب15 لغات عالمية. أهدي الكتاب إلى كتابتي إلى الحكومة العراقية وحكومة إقليم كردستان والأمم المتحدة والاتحاد الأوروبي بما أنكم كنتم مقصرين بحق قضيتنا، وأتمنى منكم أن تهتموا بقضية اليزيديين والأقليات الدينية أكثر لنعيش بسلام في هذا البلد. مثلكم تماما نحن اليزيديين مواطنون في هذا البلد. أتمنى أن لا تمنحونا فقط الواجبات بل تعطونا حقوقنا أيضا. أشكركم جميعا.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think I speak for all of us to say that we are all profoundly moved both by the horrendous story of Farida, which she, as she so humbly says, is the story of thousands. But on a day like today, we also salute her bravery. Shukran kathir. We can pay no greater tribute than to follow what she has urged all of us to do. That now is a time not just to listen, but a time for, in her words, real work and real dialogue. There's no point in all of you making the effort to come to the Suli Forum if we're not going to have a real dialogue. So let us begin with the next hour and a half. We have a fantastic panel, but we have all of you. We want to hear your questions, your concerns, and your criticisms. You can do that either in the old-fashioned way of raising your hand, and I will give you the floor, or you can sign on to the app, which you can find on your telephone using the wireless of the Suli Forum, and you can send us a question, which I will pick up on an iPad, which will be given to me. So this is your moment to start that real work. Please join me also in welcoming a fantastic panel. Sitting right next to me is Christos Silanides, who has been the European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management since November 2014. And in that short time, I understand this is your 5th trip to Iraq. So he has made Iraq a priority. And I should tell you, he brings a lot of advice that might be useful. He's the son of a shopkeeper. He trained as a dental surgeon. He studied international development, political science, and international institutions. So I think the Iraqis can learn a lot from you. David Miliband, who is the president and the CEO of the International Rescue Committee. Many of you will have met him on his many trips to the region or in his former role as Britain's foreign secretary. But I have to say that in his humanitarian role, he has become a very powerful moral voice on the suffering in this region, both when it comes to Iraq as well as to neighboring Syria. So welcome, David. Lise Grand, Lise with an I and not a Y, who is the humanitarian coordinator and the resident representative for the UNDP. Lise, I'm told by Iraqis that the UN, in particular UNDP, is playing a lead role when it comes to confronting the huge challenge of displaced. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. She brings a lot of experience, not just nearly 2 years in the job here, but has also worked in India, in Armenia, in Congo, and as well in South Sudan. Next to her, son of Suleimania, Mohammed Abash, who has the great but the very, very challenging job to be the Minister for Refugees, for the migrants and the displaced. And it is a community which grows by the hour. At least 4,000 a day fleeing from Mosul. That's more than 3 million Iraqis and counting who are displaced in their own country. We look forward to hearing from you. Last but not least, Choman Hardy, who I've had the pleasure to be with on other panels, a daughter of Suleimania, a daughter of a poet herself, a painter, a PhD from the University of Kent on the effects of forced migration on Kurdish women. And she is here with us. She's also, of course, with the American University of Iraq in Suleimania to give us some vital advice on the issue of refugees and in particular women. Ladies and gentlemen, discipline is a very important part of democracy. So our speakers will have maximum of 10 minutes. You will join me in reminding them if they go over their time so that we have enough time for discussion. But first, to the floor, Christos Selenidos.
Another, yeah, is better?
Yes, you can.
Yes, okay. Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen.
That's a compliment.
After this painful experience, thank you so much because you found this courage to tell your story. Already speak with your tongue for all of us. And thank you so much for your presence here. It is really a privilege to be here today in Suleimania, this vibrant cultural hub, in this very prestigious American University of Iraq, Suleimania. Let me take this opportunity to thank my dear friend, Professor Dr. Baham Salim, for organizing this highly important forum. Thank you so much for your invitation. As the European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management, I will be addressing the humanitarian response to this crisis and the fight against Daesh, ISIL, ISIS. In doing so, I would like to focus on 5 main points. First point, we have been preparing with our partners for the humanitarian consequences of the Mosul campaign throughout last year. We had feared a humanitarian catastrophe. Thanks to the good early planning and the good cooperation with Iraqi government in Baghdad and Erbil, we prevented this catastrophe. Until now, at least. I want to congratulate my good friend, first of all, Liz Grande, our partners on the ground, and most of all, the Iraqi government for these impressive results. But we have to wait because a lot of problems ahead of us, and I would like to see this continuation in the liberation of the Western Mosul. So, until now, we avoided humanitarian catastrophe, but we have to deal with humanitarian crisis. Second point, the military operations in Eastern Mosul have so far been conducted with due consideration for the protection of civilians. Despite the challenges of fighting Daesh in a densely populated urban setting, I commend the Iraqi authorities and military forces for having put protection of civilians at the core of their military strategy. Very important development. As the offensive of Western Mosul progresses, continued commitment is crucial to do everything possible to protect the hundreds of thousands of civilians in all conflict areas and help them to access safety, including establishing safe evacuation routes. Unlimited humanitarian access is also essential. for the urgent delivery of principled life-saving aid to civilians trapped in conflict areas. All of this is indispensable for preserving human life and reducing human suffering in this conflict. It is also crucial, and this is, I would like to focus on this, it is very crucial for future prospects of reconciliation, stability, and prosperity in Iraq. Maybe it's the first step for the reconciliation process. Third point, this is, as my dear friend already said, Mrs. Dushent, my fifth visit to Iraq since the beginning of my mandate as European Commissioner. This definitely shows my personal commitment to this country, to these people, but this also shows the tangible solidarity to Iraqi people from the European Union as a whole. I was just in Gayara yesterday, field trip, visiting the humanitarian projects funded by the European Union to assess, of course, the situation on the ground, to meet the people in need and to see what more we can do to help. I visited a hospital providing emergency health care and met medical teams of the highest dedication and professional standards. I visited also our projects for children, providing education and psychosocial support to the children who suffered the trauma of living under ISIL for 3 years. I also met with their parents, and my unbelievable experience, one father told me something I will never forget. He said, "Thank you, Commissioner, to this your education project. My children are smiling again." Allow me to say a word on our humanitarian partners. I saw firsthand their tremendous work. There is no doubt that it is essential to continue supporting them in their difficult task of providing principles, emergency assistance, and protection to all those most in need. My fourth point, Iraq is now at a very critical juncture. Prime Minister already focused and emphasized on this. Part of this is the military campaign to retake Mosul. But most important is the post-Mosul or post-ISIL era, beyond Daesh. ISIL will be defeated militarily, but the scenario in front of us might be even more complex. We must defeat the narrative of terror, the narrative of intolerance, and the narrative of division, and also their narratives on the ideological battleground. We have to defeat them not only militarily. The way who prepare and handle the day after Mosul is key. Peaceful coexistence of the different religious and ethnic groups is the best answer to ISIL. My fifth and last point, since the beginning of this crisis, European Union has been among the top humanitarian donors to Iraq, and we will continue to be. And I'm proud to announce here today additional 42 million euros to Iraq as initial allocation in the current year. This comes on top of over 159 million in humanitarian aid in the last year. In addition, European Union, through the European Civil Protection Mechanism, we have facilitated the delivery of 266 tons of relief items for water, sanitation, health, shelter, and winterization assistance by 7 EU participant states: Finland, Austria, Sweden, France, Germany, Denmark, and Norway. Last but not least, we have supported 4 field hospitals in Iraq and 2 hospitals in Erbil. responding to the increased number of war wounded from Mosul, both military and civilians. Saving from severe trauma of a generation of children and adolescents impacted by the conflict is mandatory to break potential cycles of sectarian and intercommunity violence. And on this, education has a key role to play. An issue that I consider paramount, central to our efforts to prevent radicalization, to prevent forced recruitment, to prevent forced marriage, and to prevent lost generation. Because education is the foundation of everything else. That's why I've made education my priority, and this year I decided to increase by 7 times its share in humanitarian aid budget compared to the level at the beginning of my mandate worldwide. Through humanitarian aid provided to all Iraqis, regardless of their background, we are contributing to this effort to focus education, healthcare, but however, humanitarian aid alone is not enough. We need at the same time humanitarian, early recovery, stabilization, and development support to gain people's trust and prevent further conflict. For long-term peace and stability in Iraq and also in the whole region. This is why European Union also continues to support stabilization, early recovery, and development in Iraq with a lot of funding and through new programs. So together we need to mobilize the adequate political commitment and resources to be continued in the after Mosul. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christos Ioannidis, and I think you noticed that he mentioned not just the huge support that the EU has been giving to Iraq to deal with the humanitarian situation, but that new money, 32 million more, is going to be made available. And we welcome your point that you believe that the preparation in the run-up to the Mosul offensive has averted, to use your phrase, a humanitarian catastrophe. But there still is a humanitarian crisis. Can you just, before we go to our next speaker, can you give us a sense, because when I speak to Iraqis, they say they're very grateful, and we heard it again this morning for international support, but they also mention that they're worried about the shortages of water for the displaced, the growing number of displaced, worried about the shortages of health facilities, worried about access to housing, worried about the future, not just schools, but actually safe communities. Will you go back to Brussels and say, we've done a lot, but much more must be done, and done now?
Definitely. Regardless of my expression, we avoided humanitarian catastrophe and we have to deal with humanitarian crisis. As Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid, I would like to call upon all donors to continue their support and their contribution in Iraqi crisis. Otherwise, we will face humanitarian catastrophe. And this is why my presence here, especially my field trip, very close to Mosul, is a very symbolic presence that we have to continue in this way in order to safeguard what we already achieved. And we have to continue to give humanitarian assistance in these very difficult circumstances. Also, we cannot predict that definitely in the Western Mosul we will not see more consequences on the ground. This is why I will be advocate in order to continue international community's contribution in Iraq's crisis.
Good, well done. And I'm sure that message is going to be retweeted by all of the journalists and advocates here in the audience, so your words will carry even greater weight. With the permission of Iraqi protocol, because I know how you treat your guests, we're going to go to Lise Grande, because I know you also want to speak about what the UN is doing, and not just in Mosul, but also, let us not forget, there are displaced from Fallujah and also from Ramadi. There are earlier wars as well, where the displaced are still waiting both for international support as well as Iraqi assistance. Lise Grande.
Thank you. Please allow us to start by paying our respects to all of the distinguished colleagues, to His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister, to salute all of the people who have suffered and stood up to the people who have perpetrated the crimes during this conflict. I'm delighted to be here in my capacity as the United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator. The humanitarian crisis in Iraq is one of the largest, most complex, and most volatile in the world, and it has been since 2014, when ISIL first rose in Anbar and then in Sinjar, Nineveh, Salahuddin, and Diyala. The human costs of the conflict have been enormous. In the short term, millions of families have lost everything. In the long term, we have to face the fact that hundreds of thousands of Iraqis will be scarred for months, for years, perhaps even for generations. During the very first year of the crisis, more than 1 million Iraqis fled their homes. The second year of the crisis, a second million fled their homes. This past year, nearly 800,000 people fled. At the same time, and this is positive, 1 million Iraqis who had been displaced were able to return to their homes in newly liberated areas. This pace, and this is a point we cannot stress enough, is nearly without precedent anywhere in the world. Right now, there are 3.5 million Iraqis who are living in more than 3,800 different places and communities across the country, including more than 1 million people who have found safety and support here in the autonomous region of Kurdistan. It has been difficult, in fact, very, very difficult, to respond to the staggering pace of displacement, to ensure that families are safe and have a place to live, to ensure that families have food and household items, to ensure that families have water and sanitation and health care, to ensure that children are in school, and that families receive the kind of caring, timely support that allows them to retain their dignity during the most difficult periods of their lives. The Iraqi government, the Kurdistan regional government, religious organizations, community groups, and families across the country have done everything they can these past 3 years as part of a national, massive effort to help. They have opened their homes, shared their food and resources, and protected people who have lost everything. Because the task has been so big and so difficult, and because national resources are stretched, the United Nations and our partners have been asked to step in and to join the effort, to provide support and life-saving assistance on the basis of the donations that we receive from donor countries. There have been difficulties in the operation. There's been struggle with coordination. You know, there's a rule of thumb in the UN. From the time that a coordination mechanism is established, it takes about 3 to 4 years for that mechanism to mature, for it to operate effectively. In the case of Iraq, we haven't had 3 to 4 years. We've had to make these coordination mechanisms work as soon as they're established. We salute the Minister of Migration and Displacement. We salute the Secretary General of the Cabinet, both of whom have led this operation. We've struggled with coordination, but we've got things on track and we're moving forward. We've also struggled with funding. It's been difficult to raise the money that we need for Iraq. The United Nations and our partners have the most highly prioritized appeal in the world. You know, the way it often works is that we know that donors are generous, but they can't always fund everything. So if you need this amount of money, you ask for that much and you hope you get this much. In the case of Iraq, we broke that. We asked for the minimum we needed. We've been very lucky that donors have been generous. We would like particularly to salute the European Commission. The European Commission, under the leadership of Commissioner Stylianides, has been the most consistent and one of the most generous supporters of this operation from its very start. We've also struggled with getting partners to the front line. organizations that are prepared to go to the areas as close to the fighting as possible to help people where they need help the most. Not to sit back in a safe area, get right there to the front line. We would like to salute David Miliband and the International Rescue Committee. They are one of the organizations that has gotten the closest to the line to provide the assistance that they need. David, we salute your exceptional leadership and that of your team here. We've also struggled with access. The areas that are under ISIL control, we have not been able to get to, and that has meant that there are millions of people who need life-saving assistance, and we haven't been able to get it to them. Despite these difficulties, we have collectively experienced, and despite them, humanitarian partners have been doing what we need to do. Each and every month, we reach and provide assistance to 2 million vulnerable Iraqis. During the course of the last year, together, we reached more than 8 million Iraqi civilians. We'd like to turn to Mosul. Right now, there are 750,000 to 800,000 civilians that are inside of western Mosul. We estimate that about 400,000 of them are in the densely populated Al City. They are at extreme risk. We cannot rule out the possibility of a prolonged siege. We know that they are at risk from gunfire, from indirect fire. We know that they're at risk from booby traps. We know that when they try to escape, that Daesh and ISIL target them directly. As a result, however, of an extraordinary thing that the Iraqi security forces have done, the adoption of a humanitarian concept of operations, we have confidence that everything will be done by the Iraqi security forces to uphold international humanitarian law, and this is a point that we would like to take a moment to reflect on. All parties to a conflict, all of them, are collectively obliged, this is an obligation, to uphold international humanitarian law. This is not voluntary. We have to do this. In many cases, parties to a conflict talk about upholding international humanitarian law. What we've seen here in the case of Iraq is not that the government has talked about it, not that the government has written about it, the government has done it. They have put at the center of their battle plan for Mosul a humanitarian concept of operations that puts civilian protection first. This is how it works. The Iraqi security forces will do everything they can to protect civilians in their homes. If civilians want to leave, or if the Army can't protect them, the Army helps them across the front line. Families are disarmed, they're screened, and then they're brought to camps that are operated by the Ministry of Migration and Displacement with support from the United Nations and non-governmental organizations. The families there are safe and they receive the assistance that they need. This is a remarkable achievement. When Commissioner Stylianides referred to the fact that in eastern Mosul a crisis was averted, he was referring to the fact that as a result of this humanitarian concept of operations, 550,000 civilians stayed in their home. They didn't flee, they didn't lose their homes, they didn't lose everything, they stayed in their homes. The humanitarian partners have responded to eastern Mosul in the following way. More than 1 million people in the newly liberated areas of Nineveh Plains and eastern Mosul have received assistance. UNICEF every single day is trucking in 2 million liters of safe drinking water to half of all of the neighborhoods in eastern Mosul so that people have the water that they need. We provide food parcels, household items. Thousands of people every day are receiving health consultations. More than 100 schools have been opened. The government has asked us to do more, and we have promised that we will. In the case of western Mosul, in the case of Hawija and Tel Afar and all of the other areas that have to be liberated, the United Nations, all humanitarian partners will be here to provide the help and support that's needed. A last point. When the war ends, when it's over, depending upon what happens, there could be as many as 3.5 to 4 million Iraqis who are still displaced from their homes. Many of them will want to go back. They have the right to choose if they do so. They have the right to return voluntarily, in safety, and with dignity. There may be some people who don't want to return. They also have the right not to return, to stay where they are. And then there are people we are very worried about, people who may be prevented from returning. This is something we're worried about, something we all have to work together on to make sure that doesn't happen. The war in Iraq will be over shortly. The humanitarian crisis, people who need our help, is likely to last longer. Our final point is that you can count on the international community not to walk away. We will be here with you through this long struggle. Thank you.
Lise Grande, I think we should thank you for your candor in letting us all know just how hard it is to work in what she described as the world's biggest, most complex emergency. A struggle to get access, difficulties of funding, struggles with coordination, and yet she paid tribute to her colleagues, which I think is a sign of organizations working together. It's absolutely critical. And Iraqis in the audience, she gave you a promise that the international community would not walk away. But perhaps you could give us some reassurance, Lise Grande, that with your brutal honesty, what about the way forward? What about if you say the war in Mosul will end shortly? There is no money in the coffers for reconstruction of Iraq, and perhaps we can understand that a lot of money has to go toward the emergency assistance. But what can you say to Iraqis here who worry about the day after and that there won't be reconciliation and peace unless there is money to build?
Lisa, it's a very important point that you're raising. I think all of us who work on humanitarian issues know that there can't really be reconciliation if there are millions of people who are outside of their home. The top priority has to be assisting the people who want to go home voluntarily in safety and with dignity. That's the foundation for reconciliation. On the question of reconstruction, it's going to cost a lot of money. There's no question about that.
34 billion we heard this morning, at least.
We know that the Iraqi government is a government that has resources. Its back has been against the wall. But when the war is over and financial resources can be directed into the public investment program, we know that the work that needs to be done will be done. We also know that the international community has an obligation. The Iraqi government has fought and defeated Daesh on behalf of all of us. We have a responsibility, we have an obligation to stand with them and to compensate them, to walk with them, not just during the period of the humanitarian crisis, not just during the period of stabilization, but during that long road on reconciliation and reconstruction. It's a shared responsibility.
So, and just an answer of a number, how much of the 34 billion has been given by the international community so far in preparation? For the reconstruction, if the price tag is at least 34 billion, how much is in the...
A number of member states of the United Nations, bilateral missions, have provided loans and other mechanisms with the aim of supporting longer-term stabilization and supporting the early stages of reconstruction. Already, we know that the government of Italy, the government of the United States, the government of Germany, the government of the United Kingdom, many other governments, the government of Japan, are looking to increase these kinds of mechanisms that will help to finance reconstruction.
Good. As they say, show me the money. But thank you very much for telling us. Let's just get a sense of the audience here. I mean, I think the presence of senior figures in the international aid community is a sign of their commitment. But what is this mood in this gathering? How many of you, with a show of hands, are worried about this humanitarian crisis, despite all that's been done? How many of you are really worried? And how many of you believe that the preparation has been done, the commitment is there, the Iraqi government is committed, it'll be done? Any hands? The minister? Where's the minister? The minister. Okay. I wanted to give you a sense, Mohammed Abbas, before you take the stage. This is what the kind of people are worried, but I think they want to support you. So please, Mohammed Abbas, please, your turn to take the stage. The Minister of Migration and Displacement. Thank you.
بأيتام باش زور سباس صباح الخير جميعا أهلا وسهلا بالضيوف الكرام من بغداد ومن باقي العراق وبالتأكيد بالضيوف الكرام من خارج العراق خاصة الذين قطعوا مسافات طويلة من أوروبا. صراحة قبل ما أصعد المنصة الأخ نائب رئيس مجلس وزراء الإقليم نصحني بأن أتحدث قليلا، والأخ رئيس مجلس النواب مجلس برلمان الإقليم نصحني أن أتحدث بالكردية، فاسمحوا لي أن أكمل بقية حواري باللغة الكردية. بقمان مسألة أواربون بۆ خۆی کارێکی ئاڵۆزە لە عێراق لە بەر دووسێ سەبەب. یەکەم لە کاتێکە ئاوارەبوون ڕوئەدات کە ژمارەیەکی زۆری دانیشتوان کە بە ملیۆنان کەسە شوێنیان نەگۆزرێتەوە. دووهەم لە کاتێکدا ڕوودەدات کە داتەپینێکی ئابووری بەهێز هەیە، یعنی نرخی نەوت زۆر دائەبەزێ. سێم لە کاتێکا ڕوئەدات کە شەڕ بەردەوامە، یعنی بەردەوامی شەڕ بۆ خۆی گرفتێکی گەورەیە. بۆ نمونە ئێمە چەندین شوێن هەبووە زانیمانە خەڵک پێویستی بە ئێمە بەڵام نەمانتوانیوە بیگەینێ، یعنی بە هەموو توانای دەوڵەت نەمانتوانیوە بیگەینێ. بۆیە ئەمە ئەوەندەی تر پرۆسەکەی ئاڵۆز کردووە. بەردەوامی شەڕ بەردەوامی ئاوارەبوونیشی دایمە لێکەوتوێتەوە، یعنی ئەمەش بۆ خۆی گرفتێکی زۆر گەورەتر بۆ ئێمە. لە ڕووی چەم کە ئێمە وەختێکەڵێن نزوح یان ئاوارەبوون بۆ خۆی مەفهومێکی کاتی هەیە، بەڵام زۆر بەداخەوە ئەم کاتیە بوو بە بەردەوام، یعنی بوو بە بەردەوام لەوەی کە نەک تەنها وەرزێک 3 مانگ 4 مانگ بەڵکو کەوتەوەی ساڵ 2 و بەرەو 3 ساڵە چین. هەر کۆمەڵگەیەک 3 ساڵ لە شوێنێکی تر بژی پێویستی بە هەموو سێکتەرەکانی ژیانە، پێویستی بە پەروەردەیە، پێویستی بە تەندروستی، پێویستی بە شوێنی نیشتەجێبوونە، پێویستی بە هەلیکارە، پێویستی بە هەموو ئەو لایەنانی ژیان هەیە کە کۆمەڵگەیەکی ئاسایی پێویستێتی. بۆیە ئەوەندەی تر ئەرکەکەی ئێمە قورس بووە. ئێمە تاوەکو ئێستا زیاتر لە 4 ملیۆن کەسمان ئاوارە بووە. 4 ملیۆن کەس ژمارەیەکی زۆرە لە بارودۆخێکە وەکەوەی کە پێشتر باسم کرد. لەم 4 ملیۆنە ئەوەی کە گرنگە و باشە بە نسبەت ئێمەوە 1.7 یان ملیۆنێک و 700,000 گەڕاوەتەوە بۆ شوێنی خۆی، کەواتە ئێستا ئێمە لانی کەم 2.3 ینی 2,300,000 ئاوارەمان هەیە. ئیدارەدانی 2,300,000 ئاوارە، یعنی ئەگەر هەرچۆن حسابیکەی کارێکە لە بەبێ هاوکاری نێودەوڵەتی، بەبێ هاوکاری کۆمەلگەی نێودەوڵەتی زۆر ئەستە لە عێراق خۆی بەتەنها بتوانێت ئەمە بکات. بێگومان ئەم ژمارە زۆرە، ئەگەر ینی بە سەراحەت دێڵم ئەگەر یارمەتی کۆمەلگەی نێودەوڵەتی نەبایە، بە تایبەت لە کۆتایی 2014 و سەرەتای 2015 کە هێشتا حکوومەتی عێراق سەرەتای بوو، ئەگەر یارمەتی حکوومەتی هەرێمی کوردستان و خەڵکی هەرێمی کوردستان نەبوایە، ئەو کات چەمکەکە لە چەمکی قەیرانەوە لە ئەزمەوە دەگۆڕا بۆ کاریسە، دەگۆڕا بۆ کارەسات، ینی برسێتی و مردنی بە کۆمەڵ ڕووی دەدا. ئەگەر بەو شێوەیە ئەم دوو فاکتەرە نەبوایە وەکو یارمەتی دەر، لەبەرەوەی بارودۆخەکە یا بارگرانیەکە زۆر بۆ بەسەر هەموو لایەکەوە. بۆ لێرەوە پێویستە هەموو کات ینی سوپاسی کۆمەلگەی نێودەوڵەتی بکەین، سوپاسی تیمی نەتەوەیەگرتوەکان بکەین لە عێراق کە بەڕاستی ڕۆڵێکی زۆر باشیان بینیوە لەم پرۆسەیە، سوپاسی پاڵەوانەتی خاتولی زەگراندی بکەین کە بەڕاستی لەوەتی ئەو هاتووە هەماهنگەکەمان زۆر زیاتر بووە، کارە مەیدانەکانمان زۆر ڕوونتر و باشتر و ئاکتیڤتر بووە. حکوومەتی هەرێم سەرڕای ئەو خەیرانانەی کە هەیەی بە هەمان شێوە ڕۆڵێکی زۆر گەورەی بینیوە لەو مەسەلەیە، یعنی سەرڕایەوەی کە سەرڕای پەیوەندی خراپی کۆتایی 2014 یا با بڵێن ناوەڕاستی 2014 سەرڕای پەیوەندی خراپی بەغدا و هەولێر، بەڵام باوەشی کردەوە بۆ زیاتر لە ملیۆنێک ئاوارە، سەرڕای ئەزمەی دارایی خۆی، سەرڕای ئەزمەی خزمەتگوزاری لە هەندێک سێکتەرە، خزمەتگوزاریەکان یاوەکو بە کوردی ئێمە دەڵێن نانەکەی بەش کرد لەگەڵ میوانەکان لەگەڵ ئاوارەکان. مەسەلەی مووسڵ ئەمەوێت بۆ 2-3 دقیقە تەرکیزی بکەمە سەر. ڕاستەکەی ئەمە بۆ مەسەلەی مووسڵ پلانێکی هاوبەشمان هەبوو، ئەو پلانە ئێستا بەردەوامە لەگەڵ تیمی نەتەوەیەگرتوەکان، لەگەڵ حکوومەتی هەرێم بە سەرۆکایەتی وەزارەتی ناوخۆ بە سوپاسەوە بە ئەندامێتی پارێزگارەکان یان نوێنەرەکانیان لەو تیمە. ئەم پرۆسەیە ئەم پلانە ئێمە دەبازانین کە تەحەداکە گەورەیە، ینی ئاسان نییە. پلانی عملی ئێمە ئەوەیە کە بتوانین 9 ملیۆن کەس لە مووسڵەوە لەخۆ بگرین. 9 ملیۆن کەس لە کەمپەکانە جێبکەینەوە یعنی واتە نزیکەی 100,000 یەکەی کەمپی خێرا 100,000 خێوەت دروست بکەین بۆ ئەوەی کە بتوانین ئەو ژمارە زۆرە لە خۆ بگرین. گرفتی کۆچکردن یا با بڵێن نزوح لە مووسڵەوە ئەوە بوو کە وەکو کۆچەکانی پێشوو نەبوو کە بتوانین لە شارەکانە گیان بکەینەوە لەبەرەوەی ئەو گروپە لە دانیشتوان کە دێن ماوەیەکی زۆر ژێر دەسەڵاتی داعشە تێبینی لایەنی ئەمنی لە حکوومەتی هەرێم و لە باشوور و باڵێن لە پارێزگای سەلاح الدین و خودی پارێزگاینەوە ئەوە بوو کە بتوانین زیاتر لە کەمپەکانە جێگەیان بکەینەوە هەم لەبەرەوەی کاتیە زوو بگەڕێنەوە هەم لەبەرەوەی کە تووشی گرفتی ئەمنی نەبین چونکە تووشی گرفتی ئەمنی بین بۆ هەموو پرۆسە سەربازیەکە خراپە. ئەمە هاوکات لەگەڵ مەسەلەی مووسڵە ئاوارەبوونمان لە حەویجەشەوە هەبووە یعنی لە ماوەی 4 مانگی ڕابردوو ئێمە پێشوازیمان کردووە لە 300,000 کەس کە 260یان لە مووسڵەوە بوون و نزیکەی 40یان لە حەویجەوە بوون. طبعا ڕۆژانە ئەم پرۆسەیە بەردەوامە پرۆسەی ئاوارەبوون بەردەوامە تا کار گەیشتە ئەوەی لە یەکی مانگی سێ لەم مانگە ئێمە 11,600 کەس لە یەک ڕۆژە ئاوارە بووە ڕۆژی دوای ئەوە 11,200 کەس ئاوارە بوو ینی ئەم ژمارەیە لە یەک ڕۆژە لە ماوەی 24 ساعتە لە بارودۆخێکی ئاوا بەڕاستی پێشوازیکردن لێ ئاسان نییە بەڕاستی فریاکەوتنی ئاسان نییە بۆیە هەستمان بە جۆرێک لە قەیران کرد بەڵام هەتاوەکو ئێستا هیچ خێزانێکی ئاوارە نییە یارمەتی وەرنەگرتوێت یەک خێزان نییە یارمەتی وەرنەگرتوێت یەک خێزان نییە نەچوو بێتنە پیریەوە بە تیمەکانی ئێمە هاوبەش لەگەڵ لایەنی عسکەری نەگوازرا بێتەوە بۆ کەمپەکان یا بۆ شوێنێکی تر کە یان لە ڕووی ئەمنیەوە کێشەی نەبووە. هەروەها بۆی ئەمە چارەسەر بکەین چونکە هەستمان کرد ئەم پرۆسەیە زۆر خەتەرە یعنی ڕۆژی 11,000 ڕۆژی 11,000 دوو خاڵی زۆر ئەساسیمان گرتە بەر یەکەم سێ ڕۆژ پێش ئێستا توانیمان یەکەم قافڵەی یارمەتی خۆراکی بینە ناو گەڕەکە ڕزگارکراوەکانی بەشی لای ڕاستی مووسڵ کە ئەمە زۆر گرنگ بوو لەبەرەوەی بەشێکی هۆی ئاوارەبوونەکە مەسەلەی نەبوونی خۆراکە. دووهەم لە سێ ڕۆژی ڕابردوودا لەگەڵ لایەنی عسکەری و ئەمنی ڕێکەوتین بەوەی کە مەرج نییە هەموو خێزانەکان بچنە کەمپەکانەوە بەڵکو ئێستا کە دوێنێ مەسەلەن 7,000 خێزان ئاوارە بووە 1,500 چۆتە کەمپەکانەوە 5,500 چۆتە ناو گەڕەک و خانوەکانی کە با بڵێن دێیەکانی کە ڕزگارن لە شۆرە و حەمام عەلیل و گەیارە و لەو ناوچانە بۆیە کە بتوانین ئەو فشارە گەورەیە نەهێڵین بەتایبەت هەمومان دەزانین کە ژیانی ئاوارەبوون لە کەمپە ئەو ژیانە نییە کە ئێمە مەبەستمانە. ئێمە ڕاستەکەی پێمان وایە کە دەرباز دەبین یانی نەجاتمان دەبێت لە شەڕی مووسڵ بەڵام دوای شەڕی مووسڵ چۆن ئاسەوارەکانی ئەم پرۆسە ئەم ئەزمەیە ئەم شەڕە گەورەیە نەهێڵین. ئەمە بەڕاستی پرسیارێکی گەورەیە کاتی زۆر دەوێت ئیمکاناتی دەوێت و هەوڵ و کۆششی دڵسۆزانی دەوێت. پێش هەموو شتێک لە هەوڵ و کۆشەکە بەڕاستی ئەوەی کە ئێمە دەیبینین مەسەلەکە تەنها مادی نییە ئەنی مەسەلەکە تەنها ئەوە نییە کە بتوانین پردێک چاکەینەوە نەخۆشخانەیەک چاکەین. مەسەلەکە تەنها ئەوە نییە کە خزمەت گوزارەکان بگەڕێتەوە بەڵکو بە بڕای بەندە بە بڕای تەواضعی بەندە شەرخێک یا با بڵێن دابەشبوونێکی گەورە لە کۆمەڵگەی عێراقی ڕوویداوە بە تایبەت لەو ناوچانەی کە بە تەواوی کەوتە ژێر دەستی داعشەوە بۆ ئێستا ڕزگار بووە. یعنی دابەشبوونێک ڕوویداوە لە ڕووی کۆمەڵگەیەوە تەنانەت لە نێوان خەڵکی یەک بنەماڵە. یعنی من نمونەیەکی زۆر بەسیتە هێنمەوە بە کەسێکیان وتبوو لە گوندی حاج عەلی تۆ وەرە ببوورە لەو کابرا داعشیە با بڵێن ئەوەی کە نزیکە لە داعشەوە متعاتف پێ براکەی داعش بووە لێ ببوورە لە ڕووی کۆمەڵایەتیەوە لە ڕووی عادات و تەقالیدی خێڵەکیەوە ئەوش ئەڵێ من چۆن لێ ببوورم ئەو لە کاتێکە وەختی دایک میان کوشت ینی ژنێک ئەبێ ڕۆڵی چی بوو بێ لە دژی داعش وەختی دایک میان کوشت 6 ڕۆژ نیان هێش جەنازەکەی لەسەر ڕەسیف هەڵگرم لەسەر جادەی ناو دێیەکە هەڵگرم. یعنی ئەگەر ئەمە ڕوویدا بێ لە دێیەکە کە ئەوەی کە حاڵەتەکەی کردووە هەر خەڵکی دێیەکەیە ینی ئەوەی کە تاوانەکەی کردووە هەر خەڵکی دێیەکەیە و ئەوەی تاوانیشی لێکراوە هەر خەڵکی دێیەکەیە لە نەفسی ینی بی ئەو لە نەفسی خێڵیش ئەم حاڵەتە پێویستە وەقف یان پێویستی بە وەقفەیەکە ئێمە چی بکەین ینی ئاسان نییە ئێستا بڵێن چی بکەین ینی پێویستی بە لێکۆڵینەوەیە پێویستی بە ڕاوێژە پێویستی بە بینینی تەجروبەی وڵاتانی دیکەیە چونکی ئەم پرۆسەیە ئەگەر ئیش نەکەی لەسەر چارەسەری دەزانین چەند ساڵێکی دەوێت بۆ چارەسەر بەڵام ئەگەر ئیش نەکەی لەسەر چارەسەری بێگومان فکری داعش گرفتە کۆمەڵایەتەکانی داعش بەردەوام دەبێت لەبەرەوەی داعش تەنها پرۆسەیەکی سەربازی نییە و تەنها پرۆسەیەکی ئەمنیش نییە بەڵکو بڕای ئەمە داعش قەزەیەکی مجتەماعیە یعنی شتێکە بووە بە بەشێک لە ژیان و لە کلتور و بیرکردنەوەی کۆمەڵگا لەبەرەوەی 3 ساڵ شەڕی تیرۆر و 3 ساڵ کوشتار و 3 ساڵ داتەپین و داڕوخان ئاسان نییە تۆ بتەوێت تەنها بە ڕزگارکردنی خاک بڵێ من ئەوە چارەسەرم کردووە. ئەمە دوو دەقەیتر لەسەر مەسەلەی کۆچ بۆ ئەوروپا قسە بکەین ڕاستێکی. ئێمە وەکو حکوومەتی عێراق وەکو
No. You were almost right on your 10-minute mark. I thought, well done, Alf Mabruk. We'll stop it right there. Thank you very much, Mohammed Abbas. Thank you very much. I think we all have to say thank you very much for the work that he and his colleagues have been doing in this operation. Absolutely impressive that he says of all of the recent displaced people, the IDPs, every single one of them, he says, got assistance. Every single one of them was contacted. If that isn't the record, it's an impressive record. And sadly, it's not over yet. I want to get the energy coming from your direction as well. Particularly if there's an Iraqi in the audience, this is your chance to ask a very important member of Prime Minister Abadi's cabinet dealing with an absolutely crucial issue. Do you have a question? Who has a question for the minister about what the government is doing on this issue of the human cost? Not a speech, please, a very constructive question. Does anyone have a question? Please.
How do you know this is a destruction?
Well, just maybe not then. Do you have a question?
No, I'm not in a position to direct you.
Not but constructive in the sense of it's a huge crisis. Perhaps he'd like some constructive in the sense of suggestions for moving forward.
I think there are some, but I have a question. If you
Please, a question, a short question.
consider it as a constructive question,
Well, it's,
I think to what level he convinced that they will able or they will succeed in to apply the services or aid and emergency to the level of the immigrant that he talked about from the beginning until now.
will he be able to reach the level he needs to help each
Yes,
of them?
I think.
Yes.
Would they?
Yes. It's a very constructive question. Thank you. Are you convinced that you'll get the kind of support to give them the assistance they need? Yes, you can ask it in Kurdish. You can ask it in Kurdish. It's your country. It's your.
الان پرسیارەکە ئەوەیە تا چ مستەوایەک تا چ ئاستێک خۆ قەنەعەتە بۆ هەیە کە ئەوەی کە تەقدیمتان کردووە تاوەکو ئێستا لە ئاستی ئەوە بووە کە خزمەتگوزاری پێشکەش بەو ڕێژەیە بکە کە باسێکرد ڕێژەی ئاوارەبوون لە ئەوڵەوە تاوەکو ئێستا.
ئەمە بێگومان ئەو پرسیارێکی زۆر دەقیق و جوانە. ئەمە دوو جۆر خزمەتگوزاری هەیە. خزمەتگوزاریەک هەیە ئەڵێن لە برسا نەمرێ لەسەر ماڕاق نەبێتەوە لە گەرمە یعنی تووشی هیلاکەت نەبێت. ئەمە اختصاصی وەزارەتی ئێمەی. یعنی ئەوەی کە بتوانین کەسەکان ڕزگار بکەین بیان گوێزینەوە بۆ شوێنێکی ئەمین ئەو خزمەتگوزاریە فریاگوزاری خێرایانە بە شوێن یعنی وەکو کەمپ هەموو معادلەی دنیا پێشوازیکردن لە ئاوارە کەمپە خانووی نیشتە جێبوون نییە. لەوە بەترازێ بەڕاستی ئەرکی هەموو دەوڵەت. یعنی دوای ئەوە ئەرکی هەموو دەوڵەتە کە تەندروستی پێشکەشکا کە قوتابخانە پێشکەشکا کە ئاوی پاک پێشکەشکا کە ئەمنیەتی تر پێشکەشکا کە هەموو سێکتەرەکانی تر پێشکەش بکە. ئێمە ئەو پارەی لە بەردەستمانە تەنها بۆ فریاگوزاری خێرایە یعنی بۆ ئەزانیاری هەموو لایەک. ئێمە هیچ ساڵێک بۆ هەر خێزانێک ئاوارە لە ماوەی ساڵەکە ئەو پارەی وەرمانگرتووە نەگەیشتە ملیۆنێک دینار بۆ لە ماوەی ساڵێکە. یعنی ملیۆنێک دینار لە ماوەی ساڵەکە بۆ هەر خێزانێک یعنی دەکاتە 800,000 دینار لە بۆ هەر خێزانێک یعنی ناکاتە 800 دلار لە ساڵەکە بە دۆلار. کەواتە ئەمە هەر تەنها سێکتەری فریاگوزاری خێرایە لەگەڵ ئەوەشە ئێمە توانیمانەوەکو لیژنەی باڵای ئاوارەکان یارمەتی کەرتی پەروەردە بدەین لەم پارەیە یارمەتی کەرتی تەندروستی بدەین یارمەتی حتا خوێندنی باڵا بدەین یارمەتی وەزارەتەکانی دیکەش بدەین ینی نەوت بکڕین بۆ ئاوارەکان هەموو ئەو سێکتەرە بۆیە ئەم مەسەلەی ئاوارە و لەڕووی دەستوریشەوە هاوڵاتیەکی عێراقی لە مێسڵ بێت یان لە هەولێر بێ یان لە بەغدا بێ مەسئولیەتی حکوومەتی عێراق لە هەموو سێکتەرەکانە. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have more questions from you, and I know many of you here today do have questions. You're just trying to think about how you want to ask it. Iraqis gave me questions this morning, including asking you about what Prime Minister Abadi spoke to, which is about corruption, which he says we don't talk about enough. But you can keep that in mind to respond to later, because we're going to go now to Chaman Hardy, who's going to address in more detail the question of the displaced, and in particular the needs of women, who make up a huge percentage, as you know, of the displaced people.
So good morning. As usual, I'm going to talk about the gender dimension of war and forced displacement. So I'm going to focus on 4 points. One of them is the human cost to lives, how that changes. The second one is the consequences of forced migration and forced displacement. The third point is about the reinforcement of gender roles, and finally about the way social and economic inequalities are reinforced after conflict. So what do I mean when I say that the war is gendered? War and genocide and ethnic cleansing. What I mean by that is that war affects men and women differently. So the majority of the victims and the majority of the people who get killed in the battlefields are men. That's a fact, we know that. But women, how are they targeted differently than men? Most women, especially at times of genocide and ethnic cleansing, are targeted through rape and forced impregnation. And this is the case that we saw in the Yazidi genocide. Why is that so different? Why are men and women treated differently? Well, men and women are perceived as two different beings. One of them, man, is supposed to be the aggressive and the protector and a threat to the enemy. Therefore, he's annihilated very quickly. Whereas women are seen as biological reproducers of the group, but they're also responsible for socialization of children. Therefore, they carry on the identity of the group. And that is why destroying women symbolically through raping them and through forced impregnation means you destroy the identity and the honor of that group. It's also a way to emasculate the men of that group. Men are traditionally perceived to be the protectors and the providers for their families and for their nations. If they can't fulfill that role, then they feel feminized, and this has long-term consequences for them in the post-conflict. About forced displacement, we have had numbers about the numbers of IDPs and refugees that are residing in Iraq, and majority of whom are in Kurdistan, and how uprootedness leads to loss of social status and economic status. It's a plunge in the status of a person who lives in their own neighborhood, has their own job, goes to their places of worship, and suddenly all of that has been taken away, and they're being taken somewhere where they are not valued as they had been before. One thing that I should mention is that in Kurdistan in particular, and I think it's true for Iraq, we're very new to this idea. We have been a country that's been affected by waves of violence and dictatorship and genocide. As a result of that, we have been refugees elsewhere. We have been displaced elsewhere. And this is probably the first time we are receiving IDPs and refugees in the region. And I think despite the lack of experience, we haven't done too badly, but we have a lot still to go. And it's also a new experience of diversification. Suddenly, a city like Suleimania, which was very much Kurdish, and it didn't have many ethnic and religious minorities, now suddenly has ethnic and religious minorities. And sometimes it doesn't know how to deal with it. And I think these are areas that need to be worked on if we're going to prevent future social problems and conflict between these different groups. As we saw, and as the minister and international agencies told us, usually at the early stages we are dealing with survival needs of refugees and IDPs. We just want to make sure that they do not die. But of course, as years go by, and we have to understand that some of these IDPs and refugees will stay, and they should have the right to stay, and they should be accepted, then there will be other needs like access to education, equal access to jobs and the market, but also just rights, the right to have rights like anyone else in the community. And that's Hannah Arendt's concept that minorities, and especially IDPs and refugees, are a group of people who are considered they don't have the right to have rights. And I think that's something that we need to work on if we're going to prevent further and future problems. We have seen it in, for example, in the case of the Anfal genocide, many of these refugee camps or IDP camps became small towns. Now, when I did my research about the Anfal genocide in 2006 and 2007, that's like 28 and 29 years after the genocide, the roads were still unpaved. It was an ugly dormitory town, suffering a lot, and the young people in particular hadn't had much to do. So I think we have to bear that in mind, that these camps that are currently tents, they will gradually turn into towns, and how are we going to make sure they're not going to be marginalized groups of people, and how are we going to integrate them into the community? The third point was about reinforcement of gender roles. What do I mean by that? So men of the targeted group, men who have been, the community that's been waged, the war has been waged upon them, feel emasculated, as I mentioned before. And that's for several reasons. One of them is that they're supposed to provide for their families. But when they are being disabled or when they're being forcibly displaced, they lose their role as the breadwinner, and therefore they feel feminized, and the loss of power is experienced very negatively. They're also supposed to be protectors of their wives and children. So in the case of men whose wives were taken away, children were murdered or raped, then again they feel very powerless and angry. The third thing is they're supposed to be protecting the nation and land. So they are supposed to be the army, and if they have lost the war, it's a blow to their masculinity. And sometimes also in post-conflict situations, in refugee and IDP camps, women, their wives, their sisters, their mothers find work when the men themselves can't. The social roles are reversed, and all of that puts a lot of pressure on man, who's supposed to be the protector and provider. And sometimes in post-war conflict, the men reinforce their masculinity and manhood through controlling women's bodies, and also through making decisions. And hence we see the sexual and gender-based violence in the camps and post-conflict situations. We also see early marriage and forced marriage, and a lot of the traditional gender roles are reproduced, and in fact they're made even worse than before. The fourth point I want to address is the creation of a traumatized and impoverished underclass. Now, usually societies are not a utopia. They usually have groups of communities that are marginalized and silenced, and they have inferior status compared to others. Now, when war and violence and genocide comes, these social cleavages are enhanced. The conflict becomes deeper, and women suddenly become head of household in the case of those who've lost their husbands, and in the case of those whose husbands are disabled. But while they become breadwinners for their children and the elderly members of the family, they still have to work in a very traditional society that doesn't respect women, doesn't value her, doesn't see her as equal, but sees her as inferior, and on the other hand sees her as easy prey, because she has no husband to protect her and no father. Therefore, sexually she will become a target. And we have seen cases of honor killing resulting from women taking charge, going out to work, earning the bread for children, and then being targeted by brothers-in-law and extended members of family. So if these are the problems, what can we do? I think, yes, this has been a time of crisis and on several levels. I think it's also a time for a time of opportunity. Many of the social power structures, traditional structures that we're used to, are being messed up now. The gender roles are all confused. Many people have moved around. A diversity has come about that didn't exist before. All these, and the dire economic situation, I think, gives us hope that maybe if we do it right, we can change even the inequalities that exist. One thing that I wanted to stress is that usually, and thanks to international aid and all the international NGOs and agencies, a lot of focus has been on supporting IDP and refugee support, livelihood and cohesion and so on. And I think this may be potentially dangerous if you're ignoring the host community, which itself is suffering from poverty and a lot of inequality and problems. So I think if you are 100% supporting IDP refugee communities without any consideration of the host community, you are potentially creating another problem of envy and competition, and I think that needs to be addressed. Another way I think is very important for us to look at other countries. How do they integrate their communities, newcomer communities of refugees? How has Europe done it? How did other communities like us, for example, who have recovered from violence and conflict, have recovered from all of this? We could look at Rwanda, South Africa. We could look at neighboring countries, and I think we have a lot to learn. I don't think I have any solution to propose, but I think it is a very sensitive time, and we can, if we do it right, we can integrate this community and we can challenge gender roles, we can challenge the social structure, and we can have a more progressive, open, diverse, and pluralist society. Thank you.
Very interesting points, very different points brought up by Chaman. I mean, much of the emphasis so far in our discussion is about how to not just help the displaced, but help the displaced to go home. But some of the displaced people, as we've already seen in Fallujah and Ramadi, don't want to go home. They want to live elsewhere. And how do you then turn them and give them their rights and a place to stay? Very important part. And also a reminder, if it was needed, that we're not just talking about numbers, we're talking about real lives and real emotions and roles within the family. And I just want to ask you, Chaman, we heard from Christos that the importance of trauma counselling, but I think it has been the experience of the international community and affected communities that often trauma counselling is overlooked, or the people run out of money. What is your impression here, Chaman? Is enough resources being given to trauma counselling? And secondly, because it's a double-edged sword, do men and women, are they ready to go for counselling? Is it within the society a part of the culture to seek this kind of assistance?
Well,
Chaman.
So mental health services in general are very new. Mental health awareness, I mean, traditionally you're either mad or you're healthy and there isn't anything in between. So this awareness of trauma as something as a result of, my voice? So mental health services in Kurdistan are generally new, and this idea of mental health issues and trauma, they are normal reactions to abnormal circumstances, and they are temporary. They can be dealt with. It doesn't exist. This awareness doesn't exist. I think suddenly we end up, for example, if we compare it with the Anfal genocide survivors of 1988, they had absolutely no support and no therapy and no counseling. Compared to that, nowadays we have a lot more. And I'm very pleased to say Sherry Talabani is here today, and SEED has a wonderful project of supporting, because the psychology departments here theoretically teach people things, but they don't actually teach them how to become therapists. And I think there's a project working on producing professional therapists in the region.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your questions are coming in on the iPad. Thank you very much. There are some very, very good questions. But before I go to questions, I want to give, it's not the last word, and I told David it's a compliment to be the last one to at least formally speak from the stage. And I actually have a question addressed to you here, David, but I'm going to allow you first, given everything you've already heard, to give us your last comments on.
Great, thank you very much, Lise. I will be brief. I'll stick to much less than my 10 minutes. I'm very honoured to be here on behalf of the International Rescue Committee. We are a global humanitarian charity and a refugee resettlement agency in the United States. We work in 30 or 35 countries around the world, and it's a real privilege that we have about 450 staff here in Iraq, working in 13 governorates, and the vast majority of those people, about 440 of them in total, are Iraqis. So we feel that we're a local Iraqi organization, even though there's an international infrastructure behind them. You've heard some really very wise words from all four speakers today. I just want to pick out one thing that I think is most significant about what they've said. It's easy for people in the distinguished positions that they hold for them to present to you just a happy story. But none of the speakers today have simply presented a happy story. They've presented a realistic story, and I think that is absolutely appropriate given the seriousness and the severity of the situation. And all of them in their own ways have shown tremendous leadership. But I think the realism of the contributions today is really very significant. I just want to do two things in the next 5 or 6 minutes. One is ask whether there are any lessons from other countries about the challenges that Iraq faces on the humanitarian front that can be applied here, picking up something that the professor said. And secondly, I want to tell you what the people who we are serving are telling us. What are the beneficiaries of IRC's services, mainly internally displaced people, but also some refugees from Syria? What are they telling us about the conditions around the country? So just starting with the global lessons, it's important to remember that some of the issues that you're dealing with here, though unique given Iraq's history, are also being seen elsewhere. The numbers, the record numbers of people being displaced is a global phenomenon, not just an Iraqi phenomenon. The virulence of the armed opposition groups that are present not just in Iraq but elsewhere is something that we're seeing in other parts of the world where we work. Frankly, the weakness and division of the international community is also something that we see in a number of contexts. Tragically, sectarian confrontation is also an increasing prevalence in the countries where we work. The abuse of international humanitarian law by some of the belligerents in conflict is something that humanitarians also have to deal with. And so what are the lessons? I just want to pick out a few of them. First, the Minister referred to this, I think, very, very appropriately and well. And I don't know if the translation was exact, but I heard him say that more or less insecure return is no return at all. And the evidence is certainly true from around the world that haste produces harm when it comes to return. That if the conditions are not in place for communities to have legitimate governance, effective services, then people may go back, but they'll then return again. And so sustainable return has to be safe return. Secondly, I won't dwell on it because the professor has spoken about it, but women and girls are doubly, trebly, 4 times over unequal in global humanitarian emergencies. But tragically, the international humanitarian effort does not give 3 or 4 times more help to women and to girls, and that is what's needed. I think there's also a lesson from around the world about the importance of the local economy. There's about $100 million is being given in cash to internally displaced people in Iraq. And I want to tell you from our experience around the world, this is an incredibly effective way both of helping IDPs, but also of helping the local community. Because IDPs spend their money in local shops. So this isn't money that's only for IDPs, it's money that actually circles around the whole community, the whole economy, and is really one of the most effective ways of helping people as well as empowering them. I want to give a shout out to the Commissioner for his emphasis on education, because education receives less than 2% of the global humanitarian budget, which is a tragedy given the length of displacement, and the commitment of the Commissioner in this area, I think, is really a signal and important. And the final point is that what really makes coordination possible is agreement on the outcomes that the different players are trying to achieve. And the clearer that you can be about what you're trying to deliver for different communities, be they IDPs or refugees, what kind of health, education, income you're trying to promote, the clearer you are about the outcomes, the more likely it is that the different players, UN, NGOs, etc., will dedicate themselves in an aligned and effective way. The former Secretary General of the UN called it collective outcomes. And they were collective because they were important for humanitarian players, but also for development players, and I think that's important. The second thing I said I would address is, what are we being told by the people who we are serving? It's interesting to me, it's a source of great pride. More than half of the work that the International Rescue Committee does is outside the Kurdish region. We have a lot of, I hesitate to say that in this audience because you might think that actually we should be doing more of our work here, but actually some of the civil society structures are strong here, very strong. And we have been able to, yes, do about 30 to 40% of our work in the Kurdish region. But around 60% is in other parts of Iraq. And what are we being told? First of all, we're being told, don't forget that the displacement from Anbar is not yet over. it needs to be dealt with. And don't forget that Harija is still under ISIS control. So don't forget the other parts of Iraq is one important message in all the totally understandable focus on Mosul. Secondly, to speak to the extraordinary contribution that we heard earlier, I really want to thank you for speaking in the way that you did. The degree of trauma of people who've lived under ISIS rule for 2.5 years is absolutely huge. And these people who've effectively been living underground, either literally or metaphorically, during the years of ISIS control, and I don't think we should underestimate that. Thirdly, the preparations that went in for the formal screening centres has undoubtedly learnt some lessons from what happened in Fallujah and elsewhere, and the government deserves great credit for the way the formal screening centres have tried to learn the lessons. It's very important that the information about where people are is communicated to the relatives of families, and that documentation is given back to people when they are released. But I also have to mention that we are told that there's a great deal of concern about the informal screening centres that exist, and it's only fair to reference that here. The fourth point that I think is worth mentioning is that conditions and capacity inside camps remain very, very challenging. I don't know what the latest figure that you have, Elise, is, but when the first numbers of people in camps were given, I think quite a few people thought that you were overestimating the numbers. Now, you're getting close to capacity. I know there's more planning being done, but from the experience that we have, the investment that's being made to prepare camp conditions is absolutely essential, because more people are going to come and those camps are going to be needed. I suppose the final point I want to make is that the conduct of the war is going to determine the prospects of the peace. And the levels of civilian casualties, despite all the preparation that has gone on, remain high by any standards. And that obviously has implications for the long-term health of the communities that are going to be rebuilt and resuscitated when the war is finished. And this is my final reflection, really. When I started working for the International Rescue Committee about 3 years ago, I knew that political crisis caused humanitarian crisis. What has come through to me very strongly in the last 3 years is that the line of causation also runs in the opposite direction. That humanitarian crisis can be a cause of political crisis. And that's why the Prime Minister's words, the Minister's words, about the way in which the war is conducted, the way in which peace is then built and maintained, they are related. And if humanitarian crisis is not properly addressed, then I'm afraid political crisis is what follows. Tragically, some of that has been seen in Europe over the last 2 or 3 years. But certainly in this country, you know the cost of political crisis, and you also know the cost of humanitarian crisis. And I think it's very, very important that the depth and the breadth of the attention to the humanitarian crisis isn't just seen as an emergency band-aid, it's actually a central investment in Iraq's future, and that's why we're proud to be part of it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
When you actually end it on a note that has been picked up in a number of the questions that have been sent to you, and if I can put one of them to you, Abdullah Amir. Where's Abdullah Amir? Is he here? Abdullah Amir? He wants to, wherever he is sitting, his question, how can we take care of the humanitarian crisis when we live in such a politically unstable region? What solutions do we have in the long run? In other words, much of the emphasis has been on that if you don't take care of the humanitarian crisis, there'll be another political crisis in the future. But in fact, there is a political crisis now. So he's saying, how can you take care of the humanitarian crisis in the midst of this?
Well, I think that the answer to that is seen in the actions that many of the people in this room are taking. That political crisis or political challenge is no excuse for neglecting humanitarian need. And if you do neglect humanitarian need, it will reinforce the sense of political crisis. I mean, when I think about my visits to this region over the last 10 years, it's been the commitment to attend to the health of the people that has been an important source of political stability. And so I would argue that you shouldn't get into a position of a false choice between politics and humanitarian effort. They're separate, but it's absolutely vital that humanitarian needs are met and humanitarian principles, frankly, are also upheld. That's not just a matter of having a big heart, it's also a matter of having a clear head. Because we all know that if you don't attend to people's human needs, it will have political consequences.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your lessons learned from the Iraqi crisis and from others, and the power of numbers, emphasizing how the needs of girls and women are 3 to 4 times larger, but the aid budgets do not give that kind of recognition to that community. And 2% of education, we welcomed your comment that you have given it, 7 times more? 7 times more an increase
From
in
1
need.
to 7%.
Yes, right. And I think that's a huge, because education is going to be a continuing challenge. So the hands are starting to go up, and the gentleman here.
Thank you very much. From this morning, we have
Would you like to
heard,
identify yourself, or?
my name is Jamal Amin. I have come from University of Kurdistan, Hawlier. From this morning, everything has been said, all nice. Thank you all very much. But with the permission of the panel, I would like to play devil's advocate for a bit. If we go back into history, Mosul was...
Too much history, not too much history.
Mosul's identity was lost. Kurdistan lost Mosul identity through merchandising. Kurdistan again, for a long time, lost Kirkuk's identity through use of force. We are now about to lose the rest of Kurdistan through goodness and dignity. What your views are on that? I have always been talking about these demographic changes in the region, that today I have been a refugee once, and I know what the pain of being a refugee and IDP is. But at the same time, today's goodwill, I am hoping that it doesn't turn into a big saga for the next 20, 30, or 40 years to come. I would like your views on it. Thank you.
Okay. Minister Darbas, would you like to take that question because you are from this region?
بالتأكيد سياسة الحكومة العراقية وإجراءات وزارة الهجرة بأن لا تحصل تغيير ديموغرافي لصالح مكون معين، قومية معينة، مذهب معين، على حساب الآخرين، على حساب مكون آخر. هذه العملية ليست سهلة، حدثت هناك نزوح جماعي لمناطق واسعة. هذه المناطق أو منطقة محددة تنتمي أو غالبيتها كانت تسكنها فئة معينة، جروب معين، لكن الآن اختلطت هذه الخريطة صراحة. هناك نزوح كبير مثلا باتجاه كركوك، الذين نزحوا باتجاه كركوك إلى داخل مدينة كركوك من خارج محافظة كركوك، يقدر عددهم ب 300,000 شخص. 300,000 شخص طبعا من القومية العربية مثلا على سبيل المثال. هذا سوف يغير خارطة كركوك لصالح القومية العربية، وهكذا الحال هناك من القومية العربية مثلا تم تهجيرهم من قبل داعش في مناطق الآن ربما العودة إلى هذه المناطق صعبة. وهناك أيضا نقاط ربما تكون المشكلة مذهبية أو عذرا على التسمية قضية الأقليات. هذا سياسة الحكومة العراقية إرجاع الماء إلى مجاريها، إرجاع حال إلى حالها القديم، ونعمل على هذا. لكن إذا تقول لي هل هذا سهل؟ بالتأكيد في ظل الصراعات وفي ظل وجود كل المشاكل الموجودة في هذه المناطق، هي عملية ليست بسهلة، ولكن يجب أن تكون سياسة الحكومة كما هي على المسار الصحيح.
Thank you for your question. It was a question that was raised by others as well. This gentleman, please identify yourself.
The question is for His Highness, His Excellency, United Nations and Ma'am Samila.
You identify yourself, please? Yeah. No, your name, please.
Yanadam Khan, Iraqi Parliament member. Thank you. المكونات المهمشة من رقم 1 الإيزيدية وثم المسيحيين والشبك منذ أكثر من 30 شهرا تهجروا، وبقية المناطق لم تتأثر كما تأثرت هذه المناطق، سواء من القتل والذبح والإبادة الجماعية والتطهير العرقي وتدمير المساكن والبنى التحتية أكثر من 30 شهرا، لكن لا نرى أي تمييز إيجابي لصالح هذه المكون. لا زالت مشردة في المجمعات وسنجار غير عائدة، وأهل أتباع أهل البيت من الشبك وتركمان أو المسيحيين غير عائدين. هل تفكر الأمم المتحدة بحل بتمييز قليلا من إيجابية تجاه هذه المكونات، أم تنتظر تطهير عرقي ينتهون من البلد؟ شكرا جزيلا.
This is an important question, and thank you for raising it. The United Nations Development Program, under the leadership of His Excellency, the Secretary General for the Cabinet, is part of a collective effort to help stabilize areas once they are newly retaken. We're very pleased that in the case of Hamdaniya and Bartala, and a number of the areas in the Nineveh Plains, a whole series of projects have just been approved that aim to rehabilitate the water systems and the sewage systems, help to get people to work, and help these communities to come back to life. Those programs, some of them have started, many more are planned. It's all aimed at what you said, sir, bringing resources to areas that have been hardest hit so that they can get back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Yeah, sir.
سيد النائب، طبعا هذا السؤال مهم جدا، قضية مناطق الأقليات وحماية الأقليات وجغرافيتهم يعني عودتهم إلى مناطقهم. أولا يعني كوزارة الهجرة نحن نريد عودة آمنة، يعني لا نريد عودة في ظل عدم استقرار، سواء عدم استقرار أمني أو عدم يعني أو مشاكل خدمية. الآن سهل نينوى الذي يسكن فيه غالبية شبكية ومسيحية لا تزال يعني تعاني بعض الخدمات الأساسية. منطقة سنجار ليست فقط خدمية وأمنية، وإنما للأسف أصبحت يعني نوعا ما عسكرية، يعني نوعا ما يعني دخلت يعني خطر معارك. لهذا العمل يعني الفكرة موجودة والمنهج أن نبني هذه المناطق. قانون الموازنة الذي تعرف جنابك أقر نسبة من استقطاع رواتب المواطنين مباشرة إلى المحافظات وإلى 3 وزارات أساسية حتى تصرف هذه الأموال في هذه المحافظات أيضا. يعني الأموال لا أقول كافية لكن جيدة إلى حد عودة الاستقرار، وبالتأكيد فريق UNDP أيضا تعمل على هذا الملف، وهو ملف مهم ويعني وجدا حساس بالنسبة لنا إرجاع الوضع إلى ما كان عليه. شكرا.
And in helping, Minister, the sums of money that will be required going forward to help the large number of IDPs, is tackling corruption one of your priorities? It's something Iraqis ask about a lot.
الأموال للنازحين صراحة يعني قليلة جدا. يعني المشكلة بالنسبة للنازحين أصبحوا الغالبية طبعا أصبحوا مجتمع يعتمدون على الإعانات والمساعدات، وهذا شيء خطير. لماذا؟ لأن النازحين غير موجود في بيئتهم الاعتيادية في منطقتهم حتى يعتمدون على الحرف والنشاط الاقتصادي والتجاري الموجود لديهم. لذلك كان اعتمادهم على الدولة وعلى المساعدات الأممية في كافة مجالات الحياة. نحن يعني وبالتعاون مع اللجنة المالية ولجنة المرحلين في مجلس النواب قدرنا الاحتياجات بما لا يقل عن يعني حوالي $4000 بالسنة، لكن هذه الأموال صراحة غير موجودة، يعني غير موجودة بحيث الذي تم تخصيصها لا تصل، مثلا هذه السنة لا تصل إلى $500 للعائلة بالسنة. $500 للعائلة بالسنة يعني كتخصيص مالي نقدي للوزارات التي تصرف هذه الأموال على النازحين مبلغ قليل جدا. لذلك هناك معاناة، يعني هناك معاناة حقيقية. الآن أكثر المناطق تحرر، توجهنا بأن تصرف الأموال لإعادة الخدمات وإعادة الحياة إلى هذه المناطق، لأن مهما صرفنا على النازحين في مناطق نزوحهم تبقى المشكلة قائمة. لذلك الجهد الحكومي والجهد يعني جهدنا كله أن تكون الأموال، أن تخصص الأموال لغرض العودة. استقطاع الرواتب في هذه السنة أيضا تم تحويله إلى 3 وزارات قطاعية: صحة، تربية، كهرباء، وكذلك إلى ال5 محافظات التي تعرضت لإرهاب داعش حتى تعود هذه الخدمات إلى هذه المناطق، لأن نحن نعتبر قضية داعش من الناحية العسكرية ومن ناحية التحرير خلال فترة 3 أشهر منتهية. لذلك العمل جاري على إعادة الحياة إلى هذه المناطق.
But since the Prime Minister raised it this morning, do you believe you have the systems in place that the money goes to where it should go and is not diverted? The battle against corruption that the Prime Minister said more has to be done about?
الأموال عندنا تصرف في 3 قطاعات أساسية. القطاع الأول هو يعني نقدا كاش إلى المواطن، وهذه
Yes, we know about the system, but your methods of making sure the money which is given to Iraq is spent on what it's supposed to be spent on, that there's no corruption, that it's not diverted, that it's not taken by others it shouldn't go to.
طبعا أنا مسؤول عن ما وقعه أنا فقط، يعني وليس مسؤول عن غيري. أنا يعني كل إجراءاتنا من حيث بناء المخيمات ومن حيث شراء المساعدات يعني سليمة وواقعية، ويعني اتبعت بها كل الإجراءات التي تحمي المال العام لغرض الوصول للمساعدات إلى مستحقيها. يعني نحن مطمئنين من ناحيتنا. صحيح للأسف سمعة العراق أصبحت سيئة في هذه الناحية من ناحية الفساد، لكن نحن مطمئنين بأن كل الذي تم تخصيصه لنا وصل إلى مصلحة المواطن.
Thank you. Thank you. Lisa Gonda, I've got a message, a question from you from Vladimir. Where's Vladimir? How many Vladimirs are there? Where's Vladimir? Vladimir's question is to Lisa Grande, why are the UN and other NGOs doing almost nothing, he says, for civilians who decided to stay in Mosul?
Stay in Mosul. So if civilians are on the western side of Mosul right now, we still have very limited access because this is an active theater of war. There is one NGO who has made it into an area and distributed assistance. That was 2 days ago. But in general, the military has said to us these areas are not safe and it is not time for you yet to go into the western part of the cities. On the eastern part of Mosul, 1 million people have been reached. These are people who are in areas that have been newly retaken in the Nineveh Plains and in the eastern neighborhoods. So there is constant assistance that's going into those liberated parts of eastern Mosul.
Thank you. Crystal Salinas, I have a question for you, which I think is important to mention because it is a big issue outside of Iraq and inside as well. A person whose name, a lovely name called Hero, says many people have fled to Europe as the consequence of the war against ISIS. Do you think Europe has the capacity to give them asylum? I think it's important that we should at least raise this here. Yeah.
This is a big discussion.
It's a big discussion, but I think we do know that Iraqis do make up a certain percentage of those seeking asylum.
For me, and because I'm a member of our college European Commission in Europe, I have to say first of all that for us as European citizens and as European officials, the most important is to protect our moral framework as European citizens and because of our identity and because of our European history. This is above all. At the same time, it's very critical to safeguard our European borders, to screen and to see who is entering and to avoid any extreme groups to enter inside Europe in order to create tents and everything. But above all, for European Commission and the vast majority of our member state is to safeguard, is to protect our moral obligation and our moral framework regarding asylum seekers.
In other words, you want to limit the numbers.
No. For us, the asylum seeker process is under Geneva Convention, and we have to secure the meaning of the Convention of Geneva.
Okay. Question of this gentleman here. We have about 6 minutes left.
هذا أبو بكر هاولاتي كردستان لوي لقسين برزانه بو دركه داعش و ئەوانجی هەبوو بە پێکاوێتی کە بڵاوکردنەوەی ترس و تۆقاندن بووە ئەوەنی ناومێدی و کەمپینکردن بۆ بەرەنگاربوونەوەی گروپێکی دیاریکرا لە جیهانە ئەکەین کە هێزێکی زۆر محەدەدن بە هەموو کۆمەلگای نێودەوڵەتی و بە حزوری هەمووان بەڕێزانە نەمانتوانیوە ئەوەی کە ئەیکا بیسڕینەوە یا بەرەنگاری دروستکەین ئێمە ئەبێ کە وترا ئەمە شەڕی وجودە و شەڕی مجتەماع و شەڕێکی مجتەماعیە بەڕاستیە بێەوەی لە کۆک و لە کۆبانی ڕوویە بەرەنگاربوونەوەی مجتەماعی بۆ دروستکەی ئەبێ ڕۆحی مقاومەت لەو شوێنانە دروستکەی لە ژن و لە پیا و لە مناڵ و لە گەنج و لە پیر چونکە ئەمە هەموو بوونێکی بەشەری و هەموو بوونێکی زیندوو لەسەر ئەم زەمینە مستهدەفە و لە بەردەم هێرشی داعشایە بۆیە بە بڕوای من باسکردن لە ژن لە پیا و یا جیاکردنەوەی کۆمەڵگە لەسەر ئەساسی جەندەری بۆ ڕوبەڕووبوونەوەی داعش ئامانجێکە کە کارەکانی داعش زۆر ئاسانەکات چونکە خەڵکێکی بێباوەک کۆمەلگایەکی بێباوەک و مناڵێکی بێ خاوەن و خێزانێکی بێسەر ئەهێڵێتەوە لە بەردەم حکوومەت و دەوڵەتێکە کە بەداخەوە وەزارەتی کۆچ و کۆچبەرانی هەیە کە بوونی ئەمە وەکو وەزارەت لە دەوڵەتی عێراقا پێمانەڵێ بۆ ئایندەی دوور شەڕ عێراق بەردەوامە بێ بۆ ئایندەی دوور شەڕ بە ململانێ بەردەوامە بێ. بەڵێ پرسیارەکە ئەوەیە ئایا وەزارەتی کۆچ و کۆچبەران مانەوەی لە حکوومەتی عێراقیە دەلالت نییە لەسەر بەردەوامبوونی شەڕ لە عێراق و لەسەر کۆچ لە ئیسرائیل هەیەی بۆ ئەوەی جوولەکەکان بەرێ بۆ ئیسرائیل ئێمە هەمانە بۆ ئەوەی لە زێدی خۆیان بیان با لە شوێنێکی تر نیشتەجیان بکە ینی عەمەلەکە زۆر عەکسیە ئەبێگەر هەمان بێ هەوڵ بین کوردەکان عێراقیەکانی تر لە هەموو دنیا بێنینەوە بە وڵاتەکە نەک وڵاتەکەمان بێ بە پەناهەندەی هەموو دنیا. سوپاس.
You're talking about forced displacement? A short, I don't think that is, but just a short.
مسئله کوچ همه ولایت داره سیاستی که هبه با کوچ وزارتی هبه یعنی بدون سیاستی که هبه با کوچ و سیاستی کوچ بشکل سیاستی ولایت و هندک جاری که لانه خالی کم یا دوهم لخطاب سیاسی حمله انتخابی هندک لولاتانه بين مسألة كوتش مسألة تنها يعني آوار بونو لقومان أولية بقدر ويكتو ده بسياستك يرونها به عراق لو ولاتانه كلا سردني بيش 2003 گرفتی گوری هب ولا کوچ پیکردن با دره ولات بزور لكوتشي ناخذ كوتش بو اوروبا لترسي ديكتاتوريات لدواء اوج بلاخو كوتشي ناخذ وكوتش بو ثاني دراوسي لانجام الشركومه يسترودا وبو اوروبا بردام بو مثلا بني وزارتك بو ام بروسيه جرينجيكي استايا بلام زور باتي مستقر وكندا مثلا وزاره كوتشي هي بيو يقرفتكاني عراقي شي مثلا كبوليسيه اساس سياستي ولاته بو تعامل كلنا بالأمجولات لما أخذ يا بيرو دروا بو هاتني بياني بيا يا هالاتي كانت تشت دروا.
Okay. Okay. Jamal, I wonder if you could ask this question. Minatullah Al-Obaidi has asked, do you think that cooperation between local authorities and international organizations has become stronger since the humanitarian crisis occurred? Absolutely critical that local organizations work with international partners. Do you think it has improved? Yeah, do you want to, because I know you work in the community and civil society.
Or
would you prefer not to?
I think someone working with.
Okay, that's
Yes,
fine. David, is that something you would want to?
question.
No, I was going to question. Whether the has increased. Yeah.
I think one problem is with most funding agencies that certain things become fashionable at a period, and NGOs on the ground know that, and they fill applications accordingly, and there's no continuity. So today we are funding, female circumcision. Tomorrow we are funding refugee IDP livelihood. The day after we're doing social cohesion, and it seems to me all sort of short-term, not long-sighted funding and also applications. So these NGOs focus on a particular project. When the funding finishes, they go into another project, and that issue still remains unresolved. So,
David,
I think the professor makes an important point, but our experience is that the planning in advance of the Mosul operation has actually been really important. And I would also pay tribute to the other work that's gone on over the last couple of years. If I think about our own staff volunteering to go to Fallujah as soon as it was retaken, there was proper coordination so that they were able to reach there quickly. Saladin, the same experience, real coordination between civil and military, but also between international, Iraqi and NGO, and that speed of response is incredibly important, and it can't be achieved without coordination. So I think that's a good example of different players bringing their skills to the table in an appropriate way.
Please, if you allow me, there is absolutely no way in an operation as large and as complex as this one, that we could have achieved collectively what we've achieved under the leadership of the government, between international non-governmental organizations, the UN agencies, and the local partners, were we not working closely together. The fact that we are able to reach so many people, that so many families have been assisted, is testament to the fact that we have strong cooperation between local actors and between those of us who are privileged to work in Iraq now.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, with great regret, I must say, your hand's been up, and I'm sorry. I hope we'll get a chance to come to your questions in the next session. Thank you to those of you who also send questions on the iPad, and apologies to Mahdi Al-Alak, who also wanted to speak, who's the head of the national team for stabilization. But I think we began a very important conversation, and as David has said, we didn't get a varnished account. We got an account of what is the world's biggest, most complicated humanitarian operation. It hasn't been easy. People are trying to do their best. They're not completely succeeding, and they know the worst may be yet to come. But I think we did get an affirmation here today from this stage that both the international community, the Iraqi government, and civil society, including the university, are aware of what must be done, and crucially aware, and I think beginning with the moving testimony of Bafri Abbas, we must most of all listen to the people on the ground, to their stories, their needs, and their future. As one last gesture before we end this panel, how many of you now, having heard everything, having heard the commitments and the questions and concerns, are you a bit more confident that what's necessary is in place to deal with this humanitarian crisis, which sadly is going to get worse as the battle for Mosul continues? How many of you are a bit more confident that the right actors and resources are in place? How many of you are leaving still quite a bit worried? Well, the Suli Forum is just beginning. There's lots more time for discussion. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our great panel. Thank you most of all to Farida for joining. Thank you.